Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to our Facebook Live about coastal hazards, changing coast, and how we're planning for those changes. Let me introduce our guest tonight for this Facebook Live. To my immediate right, Councillor Jurif van Beek, Chair of the Coastal Hazards Governance Group and Deputy Chair of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
Good evening, Mike.
And next to him, Simon Bendel, who's the Independent Project Manager on the Coastal Hazards Project. That's a tough mouthful.
Kia ora, Mike.
Both have been extensively involved in this multi-council project for many years. Before we get started, just some housekeeping. This Facebook Live is being recorded and will be available for live streaming and sharing not long after it ends. We will take questions in the comments area. We will try and answer those as best we can. If there are questions we can't answer, we'll answer them within the next 24 hours in the same space, so please check back. Any questions that come in during the Facebook Live, we'll get to the best we can. So, with that, gentlemen, let's get into it. Jurif, tell us about the work of the Clifton to Tongawa Coastal Hazards Strategy 2120, why the work is important, and what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those questions. Why it's important. We have a coastline along the Hawke's Bay province, and it's very important that we look after that coastline. We've got communities living there. I always say that communities who live on the coast live there for a reason, because they like living there. They have got an affinity with the coast, with the sound, with the birds, with the fresh air, and that's why they live there, and often intergenerational as well. So I think it's very important that we look after those communities, but also there are important infrastructure assets that are situated in that coastline that we also want to look after as well.
And so what are we trying to achieve with the hazards strategy?
Okay, so what we're really trying to achieve is actually work together with the community that live there, but also the general public, because we all use the coast, we all value the coast. We try to work out with the overall community what it should look like for us to protect ourselves from climate change, but also not just climate change, there is actually land subsidence. We have inundation and erosion. So we want to work together and find solutions that are affordable, that are workable and acceptable by the community. So that is actually the discussion we're having. And we've already started this discussion since 2014. It's been a long time. And I must say, I'm really proud of the work that we have done as a community, first as a joint committee and now as a Hawke's Bay Regional Council, to work with focus groups to find out what really the community would like out of this whole strategy process.
Okay, and to sort of follow on to that, how are the risks from coastal hazards changing over time, and do we know what the future will look like?
Well, what I know for certain is on the 25th of December, I'll be having ham for Christmas. But along the coast, we don't know that. These are quite turbulent times. We don't know how quick climate change will set in and give us the damage that we're sort of modelling. And even so, in the time that I've been involved, I'm actually quite astounded with some of the damage that I have seen, not necessarily from climate change, but definitely the damage that I've seen. And so we need to work in conjunction with the environment and the community, so that we actually can put structures and regulation in place, so that we actually can make sure that we actually can assist the coastal community and the coast itself in the way the sea and sea rise behaves.
Mm-hmm. So Simon, the strategy talks about adaptive planning rather than a fixed plan. For someone tuning in for the first time to this as an issue, what does that actually mean in practice for our coastline?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think it's a nice segue from the comments Councillor Van Beek's just made. I think the future is deeply uncertain. This strategy is trying to look out at least 100 years into the future. So how might that look? We can make some good guesses, but we really don't know. So the idea behind this work is adaptive planning, which says that you should take action based on what you know now, but remain flexible to adjust as conditions change and the future plays out as it does. So it's really fundamentally about flexibility, but also taking action now based on what you know.
And Jurif, one of the ideas that comes up all the time, of course, is managed retreat. It's often talked about. Is that the right approach for our coastal communities?
In some places that may be in the future, as Simon mentioned before, this is actually a strategy that we're actually looking at for 100 years, which is quite unusual. It's not 3 or 10; it's 100 years, and that's what we need to do, and that's why we're not certain of those sort of triggers and thresholds that we have developed in the plan. And there will be areas that will be looking at managed retreat. However, managed retreat is not straightforward. It's actually really difficult for those who live in those areas. We need to give them as much time as we can so that together we can actually help those communities, if that will be the case. In some cases, even in 100 years' time, they won't actually be looking at managed retreat. So it's not a blanket solution at all. It will be horses for courses, so to speak. Hamoana is definitely an area where we think that may be the end result. But we need to work together with the community to make sure that it is well managed.
Yeah, and so if we're not doing managed retreats, Simon, why can't we just get on and build better coastal defences? Just build everything.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Now, I want to acknowledge that many living on the coast have been saying that for quite some time, and there is some justified frustration out there about the length of time this has taken. There are many living with those concerns and risks on a daily basis, and are really looking for action to take place to help reduce that anxiety and that concern, which is understandable. I think it is fair to say, though, that lots of things are happening. So we've got examples on the coast right now of work undertaken by our TA partners, so Napier and Hastings. Works at Cape View Corner, works at Napier have been done where there has been some real hotspot urgent issues to respond to. But I think what's lacking is that strategic overall view, which is what this work is trying to provide. How can we look out long term? How can we be coordinated in our response and really provide a reasonable way to fund and approach this work? So things are happening, but in the absence of that long term strategy, and that's what this work's all about.
Okay, and then one of the things that sort of gets discussed around this work is the idea of signals, triggers and thresholds. And in this context, what triggers would prompt us to move from one response to another?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I think that goes to really the heart of what adaptive planning is all about. So this is a relatively new to New Zealand approach, dynamic adaptive pathways it's called, but in simple terms, how that works in practice is you define signals, triggers and thresholds, and what that means is that the trigger is the early warning things are changing. The trigger is the decision point or the take action point, and the thresholds the outcomes you want to avoid. And so you define all 3 steps and you monitor for change. So a signal might happen and you hit that trigger to take action. So on the coast, how might that look? A good trigger might be something like that erosion reaches within a certain distance of an important road or homes, or we start spending more than a certain amount on some type of action, which requires the step to the next pathway or next action.
And this sort of, maybe this is a question for both of you, just sort of occurred to me actually, is, some people say, why don't we just let nature run its course?
A good question, and that has been for a little while the idea. But as I explained once again before, we have people live in that community who've been there for a long time, who've chosen to live in that community, and we believe that we actually have got answers to the problems on the coast. So we can actually resolve the issues that are occurring there, and Simon talked about that before. At the Cape View Corner, we've actually got a revetment wall. It's working really well. Same with towards the camp at Clifton. So we actually have solutions, and there's plenty of solutions around the world as well that prove that actually you can actually live together with nature. Even, for instance, a groin becomes a very active place where wildlife lives. You can do shellfishing. People can recreate safely rather than just a straight coast. So I think what is important is actually we have this discussion and not just blanket say, let's nature have its way. Let's have the discussion. And if the community says that's what we should be doing, then maybe that's the answer.
Okay, great. So Simon, how does community input feed into these sort of monitoring and review process, and can people living in places such as Te Wanga, Hamoana, West Shore or Bayview actually influence when and how the strategy shifts direction?
Yeah, well, 100% they can, and that's really to the core of this work as well. So from its inception, it's been about community up, not council down. So it's really founded on the work of some assessment panels formed from those communities and others. and really driven by what matters most to those living in those locations and more broadly. So I think that community partnership goes to the heart of what will make this work successful or not. When the strategy, all this work that Councillor Van Beek spoke to has been done to get us to this point, once it becomes a formal strategy, there will be set review points and those triggers that I mentioned, which will be part of the process of continually having that conversation with those communities to make sure the right actions are taken at the right time. So it goes to the heart of this work, this community partnership approach.
Yeah, and we've been asking community input at various stages in the process. For example, there was a survey before Christmas exploring what people value about our coast, and we got some good feedback on that. And now there's a new survey that's live now, and we're encouraging people to take part in this survey that looks at how we might share the cost of coastal hazards, because it is going to cost. How does that kind of ongoing community feedback shape the strategy, and why does it matter that people take the time to respond to any of our surveys, any of our things we're asking for feedback on?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting the survey, Mike. I'd certainly encourage people to fill it out. I would say it's critical. So the idea with this work, we've got to this point, we've got a good understanding of what the hazards look like now and through time. We've done some risk work to work out what that means for the coastline. We've got some good ideas on how to respond to those risks, but the tricky bit now is how do we fund that investment? How do we spread those costs in a way that's fair and reasonable? The idea behind this is that will become a formal proposal in time through a long-term plan process. But really we're trying now to shape and form that proposal to be the best we can make it. And without that input, we will struggle to do a good job with that. So the more we hear from people around what matters to them, how the cost might best be shared, the better we can frame up a proposal that we hope will be acceptable and become part of how we work with the coast.
And can I add to that? Because I think it's very important that the public understands that if we actually don't come up with a plan, and let's say we do nothing, then the insurance industry will take over. They actually will deem that that the houses and the infrastructure is uninsurable. That's a far greater cost than if we actually work together and front foot all of this. I just would like to get out there.
Yeah, okay. And for those of you who are following along at home, the link to the survey will be in the comments area, and we'll give the URL out at the end of this broadcast. So, Unif, the 2027 long-term plan that Regional Council has to come up with, how does the adaptive planning framework connect to those funding decisions, and what does the community need to understand about the link between a long-term plan and all this work around a strategy?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Mike, and it's very important because we as a council, 2027 is actually going to be a very difficult long-term plan for us. Big decisions going to be asked of the community, and this is one of these big decisions that we need to on behalf of the coast. And so we really need to find out that we have the support and where the community would want us to focus when it comes to the strategy. So that we then actually can make room for that in the long-term plan so that we can be confident that this is the right long-term plan for the community. And that's really what we're trying to do. And by people actually engaging with us through the survey and in other ways as well, it is very important for us to understand where the community would like to go in this whole process.
Yeah, and it is a long-term strategy, 100 years, but there's no time like today to start thinking about it and getting started, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just sort of a question for both of you to sort of wrap it up a little bit. If you could leave people watching today with one message about why this approach gives our coast the best chance of a good future, what would it be?
I'll start, and Simon possibly will come with a far more eloquent answer. But for me, it is really important that we actually are able to start this work now. Time is of the essence. We see already degradation. We have seen some inundation, and there is some good work that is being done by the focus groups, and so we feel it's very important that the community follows up and actually supports us in the work that they've done. And difficult questions and different views is not bad at all. We want to hear that as well, because that actually will help us to actually scope what actually is required for the community.
Great. And Simon?
Oh, that was really well said. I haven't got anything more eloquent to add, other than, look, to me, this is a massive challenge, and not just for Hawke's Bay, but for our country as a whole, right? So there are councils and communities battling with this challenge all around our coastlines now. I see this as a huge opportunity to get ahead of the curve, to be proactive rather than reactive. This challenge of who pays and how do we invest, everyone's grappling with that, but I feel like we're coming close to a workable solution. So with the final push and some really good feedback and interaction and engagement from our communities, I believe we can get there and actually lead the country again and how to respond to these really difficult challenges.
Yeah, and probably none of us will be around in 100 years, but wouldn't it be great if our children, grandchildren could actually benefit from all this work and thought now? Just looking to see if we have any questions. We don't have any questions in the comments area right now, so I guess people can still leave questions in the comments area after we've finished here, and we'll answer them as best we can, which sort of leads me to say thank you both very much for being here, and to let people know who are watching online, if you want more information and you want to take the survey, and we hope you do, you can find it at www.hbcoast.co.nz. That's www.hbcoast.co.nz. Thanks for your attention this evening. Please pass this along. Please encourage your neighbours, anyone, to take the survey. We want your feedback. Ka kite.
Good.